these guides should be written by developers, by people who are actually writing code for these, and not be overridden by uh, the so to speak marketing people who are trying to get this from an SEO perspective, or trying to get this from like, oh, we just want views on this.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Amit Jotwani, who's the founder of HelloDX. They help developer-focused companies create great products. And one of the things they do is audit documentations, APIs, quick start guides, and stuff like that. And that is how we actually, I came across Amit, because I was writing a quick start guide, or a guide for StreamPot that some of you may have seen. And I came across a great article about how to write quick start guides. So I really wanted to get Amit on the show to talk about quick start guides. So Amit, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, of course, Jack. I'm super, super excited. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk about all things quick start guides.
Yeah. So one of the things we should first talk about is like, what is a quick start guide?
Yeah, so we were chatting about this like a little while ago before we started recording. To me, a quick start guide, and people will have probably different definitions for it, but to me, a quick start guide is something that's very focused on getting people from 0 to 1 for a very specific thing. It has step-by-step instructions, and it's very, very focused on doing one thing. That to me is the definition of it. And it should have, and we'll talk more about this, but it should have a clear result already specified in the introduction of that guide. And I should know exactly what I'm getting myself into and what I expect to get out of it. That to me is like the definition of a quick start guide to me.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in, because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API, and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel, as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Knock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks WorkOS for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I actually, now that I finished the article, I'm actually not sure if it was a quick start guide or not. And it's actually a question I have because so what it is to give context, I wrote this, I've built this thing, StreamPot, that helps, is like a API for processing videos. And I wanted to write this guide on how to build a AI video editor using StreamPot and a couple of other tools. And I shared it on DevTow and a few other places. Does that count as a quick start guide?
I think it does, because again, I'm cheating a little bit because I've seen your article and I know that there were steps to it. So to me, that qualifies as a step-by-step guide for a quick start. Now there could be different elements that I think would make it a better quick start guide, because a lot of, yeah, and we've all seen these, right? I mean, you go to any framework, you go to developer API products and all of that, and you've seen these guides, but half of them you feel like pulling your hair out because they just assume a lot of things. They expect you to go do the hard work, which adds friction. So the idea would be to make it in such a way that it reduces the friction as much as possible. You give them exactly what you want them to have at that moment of time. That simplifies the process of going from 0 to 1. And in my head, quick start guides to, and this to me, a lot of this goes back to writing clean code, the principles of clean code of like, if you're writing a method or a function, it should do one thing. Like you can obviously write functions that do a gazillion things, but it just becomes harder to maintain and harder to follow and difficult to read. And the same is true for a quick start guide. Like we can, of course, write quick start guides, which do like 5 things. So this is a quick start guide that will introduce you to Super API, and it'll also show you how you can do another 20 things as part of one quick start guide, but it becomes difficult to follow. They obviously become long, they become complex, and I still don't have the gratification of checking a box that I did this one simple thing. So all of those things, I think, make the elements or the tenets of a good quick start guide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it feels like that's quite a hard thing to get right, because often like your product might do quite a few things, and there might be like a decent amount of setup involved. And so how do you get that balance?
Yeah, so let's start with, say, a hello world of sorts, right? So the hello world would be essentially a quick start guide, but it does one specific thing. So let's take an example of assembly AI, for example. The basic premise of what I understand of assembly AI, I've played around with a bit, is that it's at its core, it's a transcription API, right? That's the basic hello world experience of assembly AI. You can give it an audio URL or an audio file, and it transcribes it. So that to me is the basic step for it. So I would start off with a quick start guide that essentially just that it allows you to go step by step to take a URL, and then how do you transcribe that using, say, Python? And that would be the step-by-step process. Now, along with this, as you go along, there will obviously be new terms or terminology or jargons, if you may, that will get introduced. So it's job of the quick start guide to make sure that those things are introduced on an as need basis. So don't overload on things that are not required for that thing. So once you're done with that first step, you can add more things to it. That becomes a new quick start guide. So at the end of this one, you might say that, oh, by the way, you can also do speaker recognition. To do that, we've written another quick start guide, and that can pick up from where this one left off. But now the job of the second quick start guide is very specific about speaker recognition. And they should be connected. Like if you're not familiar with this transcription, you can go back and read this one. So it almost becomes like they're piling on each other, but they're still doing one specific thing. You should be able to define what this quick start guide does in like one sentence. If you find that you're writing a couple sentences for it, it's probably doing too much. Again, I go back to the way of writing functions. But if you were to define what that function is doing, it should be returning one thing. It should be doing one specific thing.
Should it be in one language? Like you're doing like how to transcribe the title. I don't even know if you need a title, but like how to transcribe audio in assembly with Python.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a couple of approaches. I've seen, I think assembly AI does it to a certain extent that they have tabs that you can click on, and it switches the complete guide to adapt to that specific language. So I've seen a few companies do that. But if you're writing for a dev tool, if you're writing in a individual capacity on some of these publications, you're not going to have that kind of tooling available to you. So in that case, I think it makes sense to have it very specific to Python, which again goes back to be as specific as you can, like niche out or niche in, whatever that term is, like go very specific into that specific language or framework. And you can obviously write multiple of those as you go for different languages.
Yeah. You've got some examples that are really helpful. So you say like not so good example is this guide covers the super API. And a better example is by the end of this guide, you'll set up and make your first call using super API.
Yeah, so that's another, like the introduction clarity is super important, and we've seen so many guides, and I've been a culprit too, where I don't have the time, or I just need to get this thing out quickly, and it starts with something like "Welcome to my guide." Nobody cares. Nobody cares about you welcoming someone to their guide. What they care about is what exactly am I going to get out of this guide. What APIs will I be using? What specific endpoint, if that's applicable, will I be using? And at the end of this, what will I learn from this guide? So in your case, it would be that you would be able to craft your own podcast clipping system using Assembly AI. You will learn what Assembly AI is. You will learn some of these other tools that I'm using. But that sort of clarity is super important, and it doesn't need to be super long. In fact, the shorter it is, the better it is. Um, and a lot of this comes down to respecting the time of developers. I almost think that it's criminal to let, and I'm going to sound a little controversial here, but these guides should be written by developers, by people who are actually writing code for these, and not be overwritten by the so to speak marketing people who are trying to get this from an SEO perspective, or trying to get this from like, oh, we just want views on this. Because the minute you do that, the minute you dilute that value, uh, people see it through. So that's another thing. Like, it should be as straightforward, talk to the developer kind of language as you can. Make it very super clear at the introduction itself.
Yeah, and one of the other pieces of feedback I got on mine was to put in like prerequisites of like, so for instance, it was like I'm improving this, but the first guide I put out required Docker, and so like I got advised to put in like, you need Docker, and like if you don't, then that's a whole thing. Is that something? Do you also recommend prerequisites, or?
As long as we make it clear in our guides at the top of the guide that this is what you need. It should not be in the middle of the guide or at the end of the guide. You realize that, oh, I guess I needed my credit card out, and I don't want to do that. So as long as, again, it goes back to respecting the time of the reader. So
yeah,
we should put ourselves in those situations and be like, okay, so how would I feel if there was no prerequisite or there were no dependencies mentioned right at the outset? So that's definitely very important, setting expectations.
Yeah, that makes sense. One, I putting myself on the spot here. I don't know if you want to like roast the kind of intro that I went with, because I think I can share my my tab, so that people can see.
Good.
Yeah. So this is what I went with. So I had like the title was like, build your own AI video editor with Node.js, Assembly, AI, and StreamPart. And then the intro was, you may have seen AI startups that magically turn long podcast videos into viral clips for TikTok. To do this, they use LLMs like GPT-4 to find the best bits. In this guide, you'll learn how to build your own AI video editor. Yeah, feel free to roast.
No, I mean, so what? I don't want this to be a roast session. I think I really like the title and also the introduction. I think it sets up the expectations very clearly. I'm in fact excited, which I feel is another thing that the quick start guide should do. Like, if I'm not getting the reader excited about it, why am I writing this, right? You obviously want people to read this. You want people to do the thing that you are excited about. So this definitely gets me excited about it, and that's also because I'm interested in this, which I guess is also fine. You're not going to get everyone excited. Everyone is not going to be the right audience for you, but this is good. I like it. I want to read more. Like, I want to scroll down and see how exactly I'm going to do this. And the first question I obviously have right now is immediately, what do I need? Like, do I have the skills, or do I have the tools that I would need? And
yeah, that's a good point. My intro is actually quite long. I'm not going to read it out for people on the podcast, but like I say, like, you will use this. Here's an example of what you get and what you end with. What is assembly? What is StreamPart? Prerequisites. And maybe I should actually like clarify, because this is like something that I was always planning to post externally, and like it sounds quite different to when you describe like quick start as like how to transcribe audio with Python is like quite simple, whereas this is more like trying to be exciting. And I actually, this is a broader question of like, it's something that I asked Adam Devander about as well, of like, I think I was kind of hoping that this is just going to do everything for me, where it's like, it's going to get people excited to try out this thing, and then it's going to show them exactly how to do it and how to get started. And
Yeah.
it got like views and stuff, and I think maybe
Yeah.
like some kind of cool reactions.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it really, well, I'm pretty sure it didn't lead to anyone really, or many people trying it, although I don't know. And I think like maybe I was trying to get it to do too many things.
What do you like? How would you simplify this? Like, what do you think was the 0.1 for this? Like, I see Docker, and my first instinct is that this is a bit complicated because I don't have Docker set up on my machine, right? So there's an immediate first thing that I would need to do, but that's just me. Not everyone's gonna run through the same debate in their heads. So I'm just looking at just the prerequisites and the step one. I'm genuinely curious to know how this works. So if it was me, I would go ahead and start doing this because I already have a SMDI account. So I have a bias. Like one step is all checked in for me. S3 bucket should be fine. I have some AWS experience. I've not done any Cloudflare stuff, so that I know that would be a bit of a learning curve there for me. I like that you have a guide that you're referring me to for the Cloudflare stuff. So it's doing a lot of the right things. But I think now looking at it, maybe it's trying to do too much for that. It's a pretty elaborate thing, it looks like.
Yeah. I think that's the conclusion that I came to as well. That it's something that Adam said to me was like, I should have something that's like to capture people's attention and then send them to like a more like specific thing. And I think, yeah, I mean, partly it's just because the product was early and we didn't have like, you had to like self-run it, but like also,
right,
maybe I should have had like, look what I built in 10. I don't know, actually. How could I get someone, like, what kind of would an article look like that captured someone's attention and then sent them to like a quick start to actually do it?
So I'm looking at the prerequisites for this specific one. So there's obviously S3, there's Cloudflare, there's Docker, and there's Assembly AI. I'm imagining that you have one more called StreamPort. I'm guessing that's maybe a Python package or something that I need to install. Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, JavaScript.
Okay. So looking at all of these, I'm wondering if any of these are optional. Like, could you provide, could I just have the file locally somewhere on my machine as the first step instead of putting it on an S3 bucket? Like, can I avoid that completely?
Yeah.
Because I'm learning. I can always add more complexity to it that, I would like this to be in the cloud. But maybe that's not the 0.1 version of it.
Yeah, I think that was partly our challenge, was like we wanted to show that you could easily,
right,
run this in the cloud and have it on S3 and but
right. But could that be a 0.2?
Yeah.
Could
yeah, probably, but it might not have involved StreamPot, which was what we were trying to yeah, promote, I guess.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, but I mean, that's the approach I would try to look at it. Like, are any of these things optional in the sense, can I get to the hello world first and then add the name, like hello Jack, to it, right? Dynamically, if you may. And I don't know how you, like, a lot of this goes back to how I even write the quick start guide. To me, if I'm trying to learn a new technology, I'll admit I use AI tools quite a bit now to write that code for me, or at least the initial bit of it. But the way I go about it is I want to write the first basic version of it, and then I start adding the bells and whistles to it. So my quick start guide, the ones I even write for myself, so I can reference them later, uh, generally start with that here's how you can get started with this one. And then I wanted to add this specific thing to it. So then I changed these bits. And then sometimes it also leads to uh, modularization of your code. Like when I'm starting off, if I'm starting off with a Flask app, it's a huge one single file thing, right? But by the time I'm getting to the fourth or the fifth version of it, I'm starting to break it down. But if that's the version I start off with for my quick start guide, it immediately comes across as very complex. So I don't always start with that fourth or fifth version where it looks like I've got everything in place. I'm okay with having it being a little quote unquote dirty code. Uh, it's not nicely refactored. It's not beautiful, but it's easy to understand, I guess, and easy to follow for that as part of that quick start guide.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because then it's like you've got to, every time you introduce like a new file, you've got to say, okay, this is, I don't know, like I feel like people might panic of like, oh, is there something
Yeah,
else that should be in that file that I haven't got? Or
right. And so honestly, so I was chatting with my co-founder Kunal about this the other day. That you obviously want to encourage best practices as part of your quick start guides. So, for example, if there are API keys that are being saved, you want to say that, oh, make like a .env file and make sure you're saving this there because that's best practice. Don't hard code this into your main Python or JavaScript file. Uh, but that adds a little bit of complexity to it already,
yeah,
right? Now
and it's not really the scope of the tutorial, right?
exactly.
Because like, yeah,
So you have to sometimes make that judgment of like, do we want to play like good practice here, or do we want to make this simple? And I don't know if there's a right or wrong here, but just you just have to know what you're trying to achieve out of that and just play to that crowd, I guess.
yeah, it's a tough one.
I think there's just so many ways to do this, but the end goal is really you should have someone look through it to see if it's making sense. Can they follow it?
Yeah,
And it's you can obviously do this yourself also, but once you've written it, you have a certain uh, blind spot because you're already familiar with the technology.
yeah,
But the end goal is really like, can developers follow this from step one to step N and be able to do the thing that we are promising that they'll be able to do? And it should be clear at the outset. If there's a web page that they will see, then let's have a screenshot of that, or let's have a ready code. Oh, that's like one of my, it annoys me so much when I don't see a ready to go, like what will the end result look like? It could be a screenshot, it could be a GitHub repo, it could be a demo version that you're running on it, it could be a video, but give me something that I know that I can essentially compare or also get excited for.
and should that go at the beginning?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And that could be the image could be something you start off with. So I wanted to build something like this, and here's a screenshot of what that end result looks like. And then you can go on with like the prerequisites, what you will need, and here's step one. Let's get started. And at the end of it, you can have that image or video or whatever again as to this is what you will see.
Yeah, and and also on your point about like getting like making sure like other people actually look at it, I feel like that was surprised me a lot, where I kind of wrote this thing and then that I was probably like 20% done by the time, because I got so much feedback, and then when people tried it, it was like, oh, and even when I tried it, like again, like I kind of started a new project and just tried to follow the steps, and like so many times where I missed things or didn't quite, you know, they
I
just take
mean,
a long time. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And this is what like we try to do with the audit reviews that we do of friction logging is that the whole point of friction logging is really just that people who are familiar with the product or people who are writing the documentation for it have blind spots and they have their biases and they don't really see the things that a fresh pair of eyes would see. So the idea is same that you have like someone who's not familiar with it, but technical enough, I guess, in the case of quick start guides, that they can give you the feedback of where the loopholes are, where they fell off. One of the examples that I'll give you is that uh, the I won't take names, but if your API needs some data to as part of the code that you're writing. If it needs some kind of asset, it could be logo images,
Yeah.
assets like audio, whatever. If you don't include that in the quick start
Yeah.
guide, you're now making me work hard for it.
Yeah. 100%.
And I will probably not do that unless I have
Yeah.
an incentive outside of that to do it. And also this actually can work in the API favor also, because when you provide them, you will provide them a really good use case data for it. If you leave it to me, I'm going to find a stupid little JSON that I just have it handy on my computer. But if you give me that JSON, that will have the key value pairs that you know exactly will work the way you want to demo that thing. So it's in their favor to provide that. But so many companies do not do that. They assume that I will just go and find some image on my computer that will be exact specification that you want it to be. And chances are people are not going to do that, and you will see the fall off, which is exactly the opposite of what most products want. You want to retain those customers. You want to get them excited and get them through that sign up. So give them what they need proactively.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. We provided like a video URL for ours because that was required as an input, and it's like if you ask someone for a public S3 URL of a video, that's like something that everyone's gonna have to rummage around, and it's often not that simple to just like make it public.
Right. Yep. And to be fair, I would definitely want to mention. I know that you had Zeno on your as your guest like couple weeks ago. I think like Recent actually does a lot of these things. They just get it right, like really really well. In their case, they obviously pay a lot of attention to the documentation, but also how can we get people started quickly, including giving them the API key as part of the code. Like that's super important. I was playing around with Supabase, in fact, the other day, and their documentation does that also. If you're logged in, the sample code includes your API key.
Yeah.
Like it just makes sense, right? So it's things like that under the bucket of just make it easier for developers to get started and to do the thing that guide's goal is.
And I feel like it's just like that attention to detail, isn't it? Like it's like Zeno was like just obsessed with it, and it's like, okay, if you actually just put a lot of effort into not just like writing this thing and putting it out there, but actually like going and watching people try it and like or just get their feedback, yeah, it's probably going to be a lot better.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no replacement for actual user feedback or developer feedback of people who are. You might think that they are doing things in a certain way, but watching them or getting feedback from them can really give you a lot of hints as to how you want to design that, for sure.
One more thing that you mentioned in the guide is inspiring with contextual use cases. So you've got examples here, such as so not so good is use our platform for data analysis, and better is ever thought about predicting stock market trends using our super data analysis platform?
Yeah, so a lot of this was coming from the point of view that you have new developers coming onto your products page, and they've probably heard about you through some friends, or they've read about on Twitter or X or whatever, but they're not very familiar what they can do with it. Like in Resend or Assembly AI's case, since we were talking about them, for Assembly AI, it might be that you can do transcriptions. But if you can give them some inspirational use cases as part of those guides, that, oh, maybe you wanted to transcribe your podcast, maybe you wanted to extract all these speaker names from this specific podcast that you listen to. That's a very specific use case that you just provided me, and that may ring some excitement for me, and they may also get me thinking about some of the other use cases that, oh yeah, I mean, the whole idea is to get their creative cells going. And if you can provide some use cases for that you think maybe if you already have those integration guides, that's even better. Like if you can show off that you can send a URL, a YouTube URL even, and you can transcribe it. Now that's already making me think. It's not just an audio thing. And now you got more specific about, oh, so I can send YouTube URLs also. And then I can email the results of that using, say, Resend API. Oh, which, by the way, is something I've recently done. I'm sending an audio file to Assembly AI using Telegram, and then it transcribes it and emails me that transcription. So it's things like this that if you include that, now you've gotten me excited about a project. And oftentimes it's just one developer kicking the tires of these APIs and then going back to the team and be like, so I hacked this over the weekend, and I think this is really good for this specific use case that our team has been trying to solve for. So it's super important to give integrations or specific use cases which you think could be a good fit.
Yeah, and would you weave these into the article, or would you put them at like the end?
I think it could be a part of the introduction. A little bit could be part of the introduction that, oh, by the way, we've used this specific API or endpoint in these specific integration guides, if you want to check those out. Or leave some ideas at the end of the guide also. So some of that would be like experiments to see which one makes sense in that scenario.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I think we have probably time for one more question, and it's going to be a hard one, probably the classic of like, how do you know if you did a good job?
I think this is a classic. Like I've been in the developer relations advocacy space for some time, and that's like a classic thing of like, how do you judge the success of this specific thing? And some of that will come down to obviously the views or the clicks that you're getting on that, but that's like, I don't know if that's a good metric, to be honest. But it comes down to our developers, like the thing you want to measure is that did you create some value using that piece? And some of the things that you can measure for is like, is that getting mentioned in whatever social media or Twitter or X or whatever? Are people mentioning that? And if you are an API, you obviously want to measure the usage of your API after that specific thing. So did you see a bump up in any kind of API calls, or like if you were using a specific endpoint, did that get any more usage than it normally does? And as a writer of this, you should find satisfaction that, yes, I think I did a good job leading people from a 0 to 1 situation here, and then have a few people read it. That's generally been my gauge. Before I publish it, I have a few trusted sources, trusted friends that I will share it with, and I get a bunch of feedback. But there's no. It's. I'm trying. I'm trying to so hard to give you like one specific thing that you can measure, but like a lot of things, it's hard to measure in numbers without just relying on, oh, it just got like just the Google Analytics of sorts. But I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, how do you measure if this was good?
Well, I think it's yeah, it's very easy for me in a sense because Streampot has such a low like surface area right now of like stuff we've put out into the world. So I think that I know that some people heard about us on Reddit and then tried out. I know at least one person who heard about us on Reddit and then tried out the guide. And I know this because they were like, "Oh, the guide is this has changed," and like
Right.
because it's quite early. And they had feedback on like how it should work and stuff like that. And so it doesn't seem like anyone like so we published it on like equivalent like dev.to and stuff, and I don't think that many people at all came to us from that, but also we were pushing the self-hosted version in that article, so that makes sense. It seems like more people came from like Reddit stuff. Although when we shared it on Reddit, actually we did get some people who like kind of came to us, and it seems like it had some impact. And then we also put it like linked to it on like the docs and stuff like that. There's like a more like
Right.
a bigger
Right.
example of it within an existing setup, and I think it has kind of attracted people building similar things, because that's why we got started, was to help people build like AI video editors. And I think people
Right.
building AI video editors have like kind of reached out to us, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's another thing, right? That you can write a really good article, you can create some really good content, but it may not lead to anything or seemingly lead to nothing. But then fast forward 6 months and something will line up and that will just kick off. And the funny thing is, oftentimes you will not be able to relate even that specific piece is what created that connection for me over here. And we see this a lot, saw this a lot at Amazon, is that you go to these developer events, but how do you measure the success of speaking at a certain developer event? And
Yeah.
and oftentimes it's the same thing, that you went and made some connections, but you can't measure it in numbers.
Yeah.
But you spoke with a developer who went on to that company he works for full time, and they mentioned your API. And then 3 months later, that company started to use it, but you will actually never be able to connect that dot. So seemingly
True.
you went on a flight and did nothing, but it does happen, and that's what makes it super tricky to measure these things. But I'll just mention one thing, is that at the end of the day, we are writing these guides to teach someone something, and as long as we feel we are doing that part, I think it's a work in progress. Nothing is just complete quite yet. That we are all creating these and improving as we go.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good one to end on, to be honest. Amit, thank you so much for coming. Where can people learn more about you and about HelloDX?
Yeah, so we have our website, obviously. You can go to hellodx.co to learn more about what we do with Debug DX and friction logging and helping companies do audits and reviews of their APIs. They can also find me on Twitter /X at Amit, which is really my first name.
You must get people trying to get that one. Very good.
Yes.
Well,
all right.
It's a story for another episode, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a story behind that. Some of the time. But this was great fun. Thank you, Jack, for having me. I've heard a few episodes, gone back and heard a few episodes, and definitely a huge fan. I want to go back and listen to a few more. So great work on this, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Amit, and thanks everyone for listening. Let us know what you thought of this, kind of a different format. So yeah.